Why is the President of the United States not automatically the person elected by the majority of society? And what does ABBA have to do with the American electoral system? Watch the video to the end to find out. The political system of the United States. The political system is governed by the U.S. Constitution. It was adopted in 1787 and is still in force today. This makes it one of the oldest constitutions in the world. The system of the United States is based on two principles. The first is the democracy. The aim is for the people to become the basis of politics and thus to be able to participate. The second principle is the separation of powers. There are three powers in America. The legislative, that consists of the Congress, which is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The executive, which is composed of the President and the government. And the judiciary, which is composed of the Supreme Court and all other courts. The legislative branch is headed by Congress, which again divides it into two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Thus, the legislative branch of the U.S. is based on the principle of bicameralism. Congress, or rather the two chambers of Congress, have the right to develop laws, vote on them, and finally pass them. Congress is the only body that may start a war or declare it over, while its main role remains to be a counterpart to the President. Originally, there was no party affiliation, but its task of controlling the President was taken very seriously, but in recent years this has changed more and more to party politics, creating two extremely polarized camps in Congress, which almost paralyzes the work in Congress. The House of Representatives is supposed to represent the opinion of the Americans in the best possible way and is the body that probably still has the most in common with other parliaments. Here, seats are allocated depending on the population of the states, which brings the total to 435 seats, where the Democrats currently have the majority with 222 seats. While the House of Representatives represents the population, the senators of the Senate represent the individual states. Unlike the House of Representatives, each state gets 2 seats, regardless of its size. The executive. The president is considered the center of power, since he is the commander-in-chief and has complete authority over the operations of the armed forces. However, the president is not part of the legislature, which distinguishes the American form of government from many others. Thus, for example, he cannot pass laws. He has only 2 opportunities to participate in the development of laws. The first is to convince Congress of his opinion, which he can do, for example, at the annual State of the Union address, where he has the opportunity to speak before both houses of Congress and give his assessment. Second, the president has a veto power, which he can use when there is not a 2/3 majority. In this way, he releases the bill for a new vote, which does not prevent legislation, but can slow down its development. Another task of the president is to appoint ministers with the consent of the Senate, thus forming the government. So, it is his job to form the government. Between the executive and legislative branches lies the office of vice president. On the one hand, he is the deputy of the president and automatically becomes the new president in case of a permanent failure, such as a death. On the other hand, he is the chairman of the Senate, where he does not have the right to vote, but may cast his vote in the event of a tie. This currently plays an important role because half of the Senate is Democratic and the other half is Republican. Due to this regulation, decisions are mostly made democratically at the moment. The judiciary is the third organ of the system. The Supreme Court is the highest body. It consists of 9 judges, each of whom is appointed by the president. They are judges for life, unless they resign. Like the president, the Supreme Court has the right to veto the development of laws. The electoral system. The electoral system of America is basically a democratic system, but different from many countries in the world. The election of the president begins with the primary elections. Anyone who is a native-born American, over 35 years of age, and has been a permanent resident of the United States for more than 14 years can stand for election. Votes are first cast internally in the states, from which the winners of the primaries are then formed by the national conventions. These are then determined to be the top candidates of the respective party. It is not a duty to be in a party, but you can also run as a non-party candidate, but has a significant disadvantage, which makes a chance to prevail in the election impossible: the funding. The top candidates are supported by their parties, but especially by CAPs. Political action committees are organizations that raise money for the president. This is because companies or individuals are not allowed to donate money directly to the president for the election campaign, but must do so through the CAPs. The top candidates identified are then released for the presidential election. This takes place on a fixed day, in all years divisible by 4, on the Tuesday following the first Monday in November. After the top candidates have been determined, one of the most exciting phases begins: the election campaign phase. A lot of campaigning takes place, but it is not as diplomatic and political as it is in other countries. It is much more about putting down the opponent, which is done in a way that would be unimaginable in other countries. In doing so, the top candidates focus primarily on the so-called swing states. It is important to know that the election results in many U.S. states are predictable, so you can predict whether a Republican or a Democrat will win. These states are then called either blue states or red states. Thus, it is not worthwhile to invest time in election campaigns in these states. A typical example of a Republican state is Texas, which has voted Republican for 40 years, while New York, for example, is a Democratic state that has voted Democratic for 32 years. Now, there are also states, like Florida, where the results were not constant for one party. These states are called swing states, and thus they are where the most campaigning takes place, because these states are crucial in elections. The elections are followed by the evaluation, which also differs fundamentally from that in other countries, because the people do not elect the president directly. Instead, the people elect more or less electors. It should be noted that it works on an absolute principle, which is colloquially called the winner takes it all. This is because no matter how high a party wins in a state, they always get all the electoral votes. So, for example, they benefit equally from a state in which they get 95% of the vote as from another in which they are in the majority with 51%, provided they have the same number of electoral votes. This system is heavily criticized for distorting opinion when the results are close. Here's an example. There are 3 states that all have the same number of residents and each has 3 electoral votes. In the first state, the Democrats win with 90% of the vote, and in the other 2, the Republicans win with 51% of the vote. Now the Democrats with 3 electoral votes have less than the Republicans with 6, so the Republicans won. However, this does not represent the opinion of the majority of society, as out of the whole society about 63% voted Democratic and only 37% voted Republican. For example, in 2016, Republican Donald Trump won the election in America, although Democrat Hillary Clinton would have had 3 million more votes and thus represented the majority of Americans. Whoever finally has the most electoral votes wins the presidential election, but is not appointed president until January 20th of the following year. The election of the House of Representatives is similar. Here, elections are held every 2 years in the individual states. Whoever wins here in the election receives all the seats allocated to the state depending on its size, no matter how high they win. In the Senate, on the other hand, each state is allocated a number of 2 seats. Here, too, decisions are made according to the principle of the winner takes it all, with the difference that elections are held only every 6 years, with 1/3 of the senators up for election every 2 years. The background to this is that there are always more experienced senators in the Senate who are already familiar with the legislation. In summary, the American political system is fundamentally the same as democracies in many other countries of the world. However, when you look at the implementation, USA has a very unique system.